Every now and then, life hands a man a wound he didn't ask for and a silence he never wanted. Most men carry it alone. Some brave ones, the kind the rest of us quietly admire but never talk about, take their wound and hold it up to the light. Not to show it off. Not to ask for pity. Just to see if maybe, somewhere in the world, someone else can stand to look at it too. What follows is a true account, told through the eyes of a man who watched it all unfold from a few feet away, a ledger in his lap and too many opinions in his head. He wasn't looking for a story worth telling, but this one found him anyway. Don't rush through it. Some things take the time they take. I keep a ledger. Not the kind ranchers keep, columns of cattle weights and hay costs and what the spring rain did or didn't do to the south pasture. Mine's different. It's a brown leather book, soft at the corners from being shoved in and out of my coat pocket since 1887, and what I write in it are the things I see that I can't explain away before nightfall. Strange moments, people at crossroads, that kind of thing. I've filled 7 of them. I mention this because the story I'm about to tell you, the one about Eli Crane and the woman who read his notice in the window of Donovan's Feed and Supply, started as a ledger entry. 3 lines, maybe 4. Observation, nothing more. That's all it was supposed to be. It became considerably more than that. My name is Calvin Prout, and in the autumn of 1891, I was riding supply runs between Fort Briscoe and the small ranch settlements scattered along the Cimarron River in the Oklahoma Territory. Dull work, honest pay, and the kind of long silences between towns that either break a man or teach him to listen to what the land is actually saying. I'd gotten used to listening. Burrell's Crossing was the 3rd stop on my weekly route. Population 40-something, depending on whether you counted the Harkin brothers as one entity or two. It had a livery, a dry goods store, a blacksmith, a small schoolhouse that doubled as a church on Sundays, and Donovan's Feed and Supply, which also served as the unofficial post office, rumor exchange, and social courthouse of the entire settlement. Hector Donovan nailed things to his window. Wanted notices, land announcements, auction dates, the occasional lost dog plea with a hand-drawn portrait that looked more like a worried sheep. People came from 3 settlements over just to stand at that window and catch up on the world, because Hector had an instinct for what mattered and posted it accordingly. So when I pulled my wagon up on that Thursday morning in October and saw the small hand-printed card in the lower left corner of the glass, not the prime spot, tucked modest-like beneath a seed catalog advertisement, I almost didn't notice it. But I did notice it, because I notice things. It's a problem I have. I climbed down, looped my reins, and stepped close enough to read. Marriage notice. My name is Eli Crane. I am 34 years of age, widowed, and I work 200 acres 3 miles north of Burrell's Crossing on the Cimarron Fork. I lost my right leg below the knee at Wounded Knee in December of last year. I walk with a prosthetic. I manage my land without assistance. I am in search of a woman of good character who does not require perfection of form and who would consider building a life in earnest. I am not a complicated man. I am a lonely one. If you are reading this and find yourself curious, I am at the ranch most mornings. You don't have to decide anything to come. E. Crane. I stood there for a longer moment than I probably should have. Not because it was unusual for men in the territory to post marriage notices. They did it regularly. You'd see them on church boards and store windows and the backs of almanacs, respectable, practical, hopeful little paragraphs that read more like livestock listings than declarations of any kind. Seeking companionship. Good cook preferred. Christian household. What stopped me about Eli Crane's notice was the last line. You don't have to decide anything to come. That wasn't a livestock listing. That was a man who had thought very carefully about what he was actually asking for, and had decided that the asking itself was the most honest thing he could offer. I wrote it down in my ledger, all of it, word for word. Then I went inside to collect Hector's supply order and forgot about it, or tried to. I met Eli Crane for the first time 3 days later, which was not a coincidence, because nothing in a small settlement is ever a coincidence. Hector mentioned him while I was loading flour sacks. Said Eli had come in that Tuesday to post the notice himself, quiet about it, asked Hector would he put it somewhere people would see. Hector said he'd been watching out the window half the week to see who stopped to read it. "Anybody go out there?" I asked. Hector made a face that meant no without bothering to use the word. "He expecting someone. Man doesn't put a notice in a window unless he's expecting someone, Calvin." I took my supply list and went about my work, but on my way out of Burrell's Crossing I turned north instead of south. 3 miles, the notice had said. I told myself I was taking the long route for no reason in particular. My ledger, if it could talk, would disagree. The Crane property was modest and dignified in the way that land gets when a person tends it more out of stubbornness than optimism. The fences were straight. The yard was cleared. The house was small, 2 rooms I guessed, built from lumber that had weathered but not rotted, and there was a garden plot along the south wall that had been put to bed for winter. The soil turned, the rows marked with small sticks. Someone had cared about that garden. Cared about it enough to tuck it in proper before the cold came. Eli was at the water pump when I rolled in. He heard the wagon and straightened slowly, not the slow of an old man, but the slow of someone managing a body that requires negotiation. He was tall, dark-haired, going gray at the temples, with a face that had been out in weather long enough to look like it belonged there. He wore canvas trousers and a heavy flannel shirt and work boots, one of which, on the right side, sat slightly different from the other, the prosthetic foot inside it absorbing his weight with a stiffness that his body had learned to compensate for so naturally you'd almost miss it. Almost. He looked at my wagon, then at me, with the particular expression of a man who has been hoping for something all week and has taught himself not to look like it. "Help you," he said. "Calvin Pruitt," I said, "supply route. I take the North Road sometimes." A pause. He looked at the road behind me, which plainly went nowhere useful for a supply route. "Do you?" he said. "I saw your notice at Donovan's." He didn't move. His right hand was still on the pump handle. The silence between us had the particular quality of a silence where a man is deciding whether to be angry or simply tired, and doesn't have enough energy for either. "Came to look at me," he said, "not mean about it, just flat." "Came to see if you were real," I said. "The notice read like a real person wrote it." Something shifted in his face, so small I might have imagined it, a fractional loosening around his eyes. "Most people post a notice like that to see if anyone comes," he said. "Took me a week to decide. I wasn't too proud to do it." "Took you another minute to decide to tuck it in the corner where it was harder to see." He looked at me for a long moment. "You're observant for a supply driver," he said. "It's a problem I have," I said. He almost smiled. He turned it into something else before it got there, but I caught it. He didn't invite me in, but he didn't send me away either. We stood in the yard, and he answered my questions without volunteering anything, which is the way honest men talk when they're not yet sure who they're talking to. He'd homesteaded the land 4 years ago after coming back from the army. His wife, Martha, had died of fever 18 months in, before the land was fully established, before the second crop, before he'd had time to become anything other than a man trying to hold something together with both hands. Then Wounded Knee, which he did not describe in detail. Just, I was there. I came back 1 piece shorter and several ways quieter. He said that last part without bitterness, which told me more about him than an hour of explanation could have. "The leg doesn't stop you working?" I asked. "It changes how I work," he said. "I do things differently now. I think about a task before I start it instead of just starting it. Probably makes me slower. Probably makes me less stupid about it too. He looked toward the south field when he said that. I followed his gaze. The land was good land, flat in the middle, slightly elevated at the south end where the drainage would be better. He'd planted it well. What do you think stops women from coming? I asked him. He considered this with the seriousness it deserved. The leg probably, he said, or the widow part or both. Or the notice in the corner where it's hard to see. He turned and looked at me, and this time he let the almost smile finish. Get off my property, Prout, he said. But he didn't mean it, and we both knew it. I came back the following Thursday, and the one after that. I told myself I was checking in. That it was the decent thing to do, given that nobody else seemed to be checking in on Eli Crane, and that a man who put a quiet notice in a store window and then went home to wait deserved at least one person to acknowledge the waiting. My ledger at this point had 4 entries about him. I noticed that and didn't say anything about it, even to myself. On my 4th visit, he told me about Martha. Not all of it. He wasn't the kind of man who told you all of something. But he told me that she'd been the one who planned the garden, that she'd brought the seed from her family's land in Missouri, and that he'd kept planting it every year since she died because it felt like a lie to let it go fallow. He tended it the way she'd shown him, the spacing, the depth, the little sticks to mark the rows. She'd have thought the notice was ridiculous, he said. Would she? No, he admitted. She'd have thought it was about time. He was quiet for a while. What if nobody comes? He said. Not to me, really. More to the fence post he was leaning against. I didn't have an answer that felt honest enough to give him. So I just wrote it down instead. Her name was Nora Vass, and she read Eli Crane's notice on a Thursday morning in November while holding a sack of cornmeal she'd forgotten she was holding. I know this because I was inside Donovan's when she came in, arguing with Hector about a discrepancy in my last invoice. A dull dispute about the difference between 24 and 2.5 dozen that neither of us was particularly invested in. The bell above the door rang. I glanced over, and there she was. A woman in her mid-30s, brown coat, dark hair pinned up with the kind of efficiency that has no interest in being noticed, and a face that was, the word that kept arriving in my head was composed. Not cold, not remote. Composed the way a person looks when they've spent a long time making peace with something and have mostly succeeded. She picked up the cornmeal, went to the window, saw the notice. Read it. Stopped. Read it again. I watched this happen. I was not particularly proud of the fact that I watched it happen, but I watched it. She stood there for a full 40 seconds, I counted, because I do that, and her expression didn't change the way you'd expect. There was no visible reaction of the "oh how sweet" variety, no little head tilt, no smile creeping in. She read it the way you read something that means something to you, which is to say with a kind of stillness that has weight to it. Then she turned and asked Hector who had posted it. Hector told her, name road 3 miles north. She nodded once, bought the cornmeal and left. Hector looked at me. I looked at the ledger I'd instinctively opened without realizing it. You're going to follow her, Hector said. I'm going to take the north road, I said. Same thing. I caught up with her at the Split Fork, half a mile out of town. She was on a gray horse, riding at an easy pace, and she heard my wagon and turned without alarm, the kind of person who's used to being alone on a road and isn't afraid of company. I introduced myself. She told me her name. We rode in parallel for a minute while she decided what category I fell into, and then she said, "You're the supply driver who's been visiting him." Hector talks. Hector is the only newspaper this settlement has, she said. Are you protective of him? Of Eli? Yes. I thought about this. I'm not sure he'd appreciate being protected, I said. But if you're asking whether I'm paying attention to what happens to him, yes. She accepted this without challenge. After another moment, "What's he like?" And here was the thing, the question wasn't what does he look like, or is the land good, or does he have money? It was what's he like, which is either a very practical question or a very particular one, depending on who's asking. "Honest," I said. "Careful with things. He thinks before he talks, and when he talks it means something. He keeps his wife's garden going even though she's been gone 3 years. He put his notice in the bottom corner of the window on purpose because he was afraid of looking desperate." She was quiet. "He probably is a little desperate," I added, "but it's the dignified kind." "There's a dignified kind." "There is when it comes from the right place," I said. She rode without speaking for almost a quarter mile. I let her. "I was married before," she said finally. "My husband, he had a difficult time after the war, not the same war, earlier one. He was kind mostly, but he was somewhere else in his head most of the time. He died 4 years ago. Cholera." She said it the way people say true things that have already been grieved, direct, without performance. "I don't want to be someone's solution," she added. "I've had enough of being someone's solution." This was a precise and important distinction, and I respected it. "Did the notice read like a solution?" I asked. A pause. "No," she said. "It read like an invitation." She went to his ranch alone. I don't know what passed between them the first time because I'm not that kind of nosy. I draw a line somewhere. My ledger has a gap in it. 3 days, blank pages. What I know is what Eli told me the following Thursday when I came up the North Road and found him in the yard, not at the water pump, not at the fence, but just standing, hands in his pockets, looking south like he was waiting for something to appear on the horizon. He heard my wagon and turned, and his face was doing something complicated. "She came," he said. "I know," I said. He looked at me. "Hector," I said. He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "She stayed 3 hours," he said. "We had coffee. She walked the south field with me." "How'd that go?" He was quiet a moment. "She didn't look at my leg, not once. Not the way people look at it when they're trying not to look at it. She just didn't look at it. Like it was beside the point." "Is it beside the point?" "To me it isn't," he said. "But the way she treated it like it wasn't." He stopped, looked at his hands. "I don't know how to explain that." "You don't have to explain it," I said. He nodded, something eased in his shoulders. "She's coming back Saturday," he said. And then, before I could say anything, he turned and walked back toward the house, which was how I knew the conversation was over. I wrote in my ledger, "He's not the same as he was last Thursday. The word that keeps coming is lighter." They met 4 more times over the course of November. I know this because Burrell's Crossing is 40 people, and everyone knew it, even though no one said it directly because the settlement had its own manners about these things. You would hear it in the way Hector stacked the shelves with slightly more energy on Saturdays. In the way Mrs. Harkin mentioned to no one in particular that Nora Vass had been seen on the North Road again, with what sounded like mild disapproval, but was actually a very local form of attention and approval combined. I watched it unfold the only way I could, in pieces. In the things Eli said on my Thursday visits, which got gradually longer. In the way the yard looked when I pulled in small changes that accumulate. A second chair on the porch. A jar of something preserved sitting on the fence post like it had been set down during a conversation and left there. But I also watched it in the things that didn't change, which told a different story. Eli still put the notice up every Thursday morning. I noticed this on my 3rd Thursday in November, when I came up to Donovan's and saw it still in the window, same spot, same corner. I went inside and asked Hector. Hector shrugged. He comes in every Tuesday to see if I've taken it down, and every Tuesday I ask him if he wants me to, and he says not yet. Not yet, I repeated. That's what the man says. I thought about that for the rest of the day. Not yet. Two words that could mean a dozen things, depending on the kind of man saying them. For Eli Crane, I thought I understood what they meant. He was a man who had built very little that lasted. A wife, a farm, a leg, a version of himself that felt capable. One by one, things had been taken, and what remained, the farm, the garden rose, the careful way he did things, he held gently, the way you hold things when you know how easily they go. He wasn't keeping the notice up because he was uncertain about Nora. He was keeping it up because he wasn't ready to believe it was real yet. The notice was his permission slip. His door, standing open. Taking it down would mean trusting that the door could stay open without the sign to hold it. That's a specific kind of fear. I know it because I've had it myself. I didn't write this in my ledger. Some things you understand too personally to write down. The trouble came on the last Thursday in November. I arrived at Donovan's to find Nora's gray horse tied outside. I went in, and the bell rang, and she and Hector both looked at me with the particular expression of people who had been in the middle of something important and had been interrupted at the wrong moment. Nora had the notice in her hand. She'd taken it off the window. Hector looked diplomatically at his shelves. "He still has it up," she said to me, not accusatory, but something in her voice had an edge of something I'd call controlled hurt, the kind you manage so it doesn't become something else. "I know," I said. "It's been 6 weeks, Calvin." "I know." She set the notice on the counter. "What does it mean that he's still putting it up? Because I need to know what it means." And there it was, the real question. Not does he like me or is he interested or any of the softer versions, but the direct, honest version that a woman asks when she's not interested in interpreting signals and just wants someone to say the plain thing. I owed her the plain thing. "It means he's afraid," I said, "not of you, of allowing himself to keep you." She looked at me. "He's lost a lot of things he was counting on," I said. "He's careful with hope. That's not the same as not having it." She was quiet a long moment. "I don't need him to be unafraid," she said finally. "I just need him to tell me the truth about it." She picked up her cornmeal and her coat and walked out. I looked at the notice on the counter. Then I picked it up, folded it, and put it in my coat pocket. I wasn't sure why. I wrote it in my ledger later, took the notice. Not sure whose permission that was mine to take. Probably wasn't mine at all. That Saturday, Eli Crane came to Donovan's and his notice wasn't in the window. Hector told him he didn't know what had happened to it, which was not precisely a lie. I know what Eli did next because Hector told me Monday, and because 40-person settlements have no secrets. He rode south. He'd never come to Burrell's Crossing for anything personal in the 6 weeks since he'd posted that notice. He'd posted it and waited. But Saturday evening, he saddled his horse and rode south to the small house at the edge of the settlement where Nora Vass lived with her sister and brother-in-law and knocked on the door. She answered it. What he said, I don't know. My ledger is blank again. That's the right kind of blank. There is a particular quality to December light on the Oklahoma territory that I have never managed to describe in a way that satisfies me. It comes in low and pale and wide, touching everything equally, the frost on the fence posts, and the yellow grass and the dark-turned earth of a winter garden, and it makes ordinary things look like they've been considered, like the light is paying attention. I noticed this on the first Saturday of December, when I turned up the North Road, for what I told myself might be the last time for a while. The supply route was what it was. I had no professional reason to keep ending my Thursday runs with a detour up a road that led nowhere useful. I'd kept coming anyway, and I knew why Eli Crane was the most interesting entry in my current ledger, and I had grown, against my better instincts, to care whether the story turned out right. But there is a point in a story where the observer becomes unnecessary, where continuing to observe is just watching someone live their life, which stops being observation and starts being something more like loneliness dressed up as curiosity. I suspected I was approaching that point. I pulled up to the yard, and Eli was on the porch. He wasn't alone. Nora was in the garden. That's the first thing I noticed, not that she was present but where she was standing. She had her coat on and her hair pinned the same efficient way it always was, and she was crouched at the south end of the garden bed with something in her hand, leaning close to examine one of the little row marker sticks Eli used. She wasn't doing anything with it, not adjusting it, just looking at it, reading what was marked there, or maybe just recognizing the care that had gone into it. Eli was watching her from the porch, a cup of something warm in both hands, and his face was doing the complicated thing again. Only this time the complication was different. It wasn't the careful blankness of a man managing hope from a distance. It was the particular unguarded expression of someone watching a thing they'd stopped believing in start to become real. He heard my wagon and looked over. I half lifted a hand. He nodded. That was enough. He didn't come down to the yard, didn't make the visitor's theater of coming down to the yard. Just nodded, which meant you can come up and also you can see what I'm looking at, and also, I thought, thank you for not taking this from me before it became what it's becoming. I tied the reins and climbed up to the porch. She's checking your markers, I said. She's checking my spacing, he said. She says I plant the rows too close on the east side. Is she right? A pause. Probably, he said, no resentment in it. Something that sounded like pleasure, actually. The pleasure of having someone around who notices your mistakes and says so. I stayed an hour. We sat on the porch, and Nora came up eventually with garden dirt on her coat and didn't apologize for it. And the three of us talked about nothing consequential. The weather coming, the state of the south pasture, a litter of dogs one of the Harkin brothers had been trying to place. The conversation was easy in the way conversations get when the people having them don't have anything to prove. I kept my ledger in my coat pocket and didn't open it once. At some point, Nora went inside to start something on the stove, and Eli and I were alone on the porch, and he looked out at the garden for a long moment. When he turned back to me, his expression had the quality of a man about to say something he's been thinking about for longer than the conversation warrants. The notice, he said. What about it? Hector says he doesn't know what happened to it, but Hector knows everything that happens in this settlement, Calvin. I looked at the middle distance. I've been thinking about it, he said. Whoever took it down, whether it was Hector or someone else or the wind, I think it might have been the right time for it to come down. A pause. I went to her door, on Saturday. I heard. He looked at me sideways. 40 people, he said. And no secrets, I agreed. He turned back to the garden. I told her I was afraid, he said. That's the whole of it. I knocked on the door and she answered it, and I said I was afraid of this being real because every real thing I've had has eventually not been there anymore, and I didn't know how to stop making decisions based on that. He said it the way he always said things, not as a speech, but as a plain account of a fact. What did she say? I asked. She said she was too, he said. And then she made coffee and we sat in her sister's kitchen until 10 o'clock at night. I didn't say anything. It's not fixed, he said. I'm still afraid. Probably I'll keep being afraid for a long time. Probably, I said. But she knows that now. He looked at the garden, at the row markers, at the east side where she'd said the spacing was wrong. She knows it, and she came back anyway. The day I had been avoiding arrived 3 weeks later. Not dramatically. Just the way things arrive when you've known they're coming, quietly, with the sense that the world has already accounted for it even if you haven't. It was the last supply run of the year. I had a full day and a half of settlements to get through and a real reason to take the south road out of Burrell's Crossing without detouring north. I did the whole run straight, delivered everything, settled my accounts with Hector, and was back in my wagon heading home by mid-afternoon. I turned north anyway, but I didn't go all the way to the ranch. I stopped at the fork, the split in the road where I'd first ridden alongside Nora in November, the point where north becomes a choice rather than a default. I sat there for a few minutes with the December light coming in low and pale, and the horse breathing steam in the cold air. There was nothing to see from the fork. The Crane property was another mile and a half. I couldn't see the house or the garden or the porch, just the road going north and the grass on either side of it, yellow and still in the cold. I opened my ledger to the last page with writing. She went to look at his garden markers. He watched her from the porch. He's not the same man I met 6 weeks ago. Neither is she, I think, though I have less to compare it to. I am trying to decide whether what I've been observing is simply two lonely people finding each other in a small settlement, or something worth the ink I've spent on it. I don't know why this should feel different from anything else I've watched. 40 people, a supply route, a man with a prosthetic leg and a garden he tends for a dead woman's memory, a woman who reads a notice twice before she puts down her cornmeal. Maybe the difference is that I didn't see them as remarkable at the start. I saw them as real, and I've watched them stay real all the way through, without either of them performing anything, without the story bending toward something tidy or convenient. That might be the whole of what I came to see. I closed the ledger. That spring I took a different supply route, north to the Cherokee territory, better pay, longer runs. I came through the Cimarron settlements twice in the summer of 1892, and both times I stopped at Donovan's, where Hector told me what he always tells me, which is more than I asked and exactly what I needed to know. They'd married in February. Small ceremony, schoolhouse, the Harkins in attendance, Mrs. Harkin allegedly crying throughout in what was described as an entirely dignified manner. The garden had been replanted, with corrected spacing on the east side. Eli had started taking the south pasture into a proper hay rotation, a two-person decision, Hector implied, the kind of plan you make when you're planning for more than one season. Nora had, Hector mentioned with the careful neutrality of someone trying very hard not to sound delighted, been seen teaching the Harkin children's youngest to identify plants in the garden by their markers. I bought my supplies, loaded the wagon, and was halfway out the door when I remembered something. I reached into my coat pocket. The notice was still there. It had been there since November, soft at the corners from 3 months against my ribs. I unfolded it on the counter and smoothed it flat. Eli's handwriting, careful, unhurried print. I am not a complicated man. I am a lonely one. Hector looked at it, looked at me. You had it this whole time, he said. Seemed like the wrong thing to throw away, I said. He picked it up, considered it. Then he took it to the window and held it up to the light, that December-quality light, pale and wide, and looked through it like there might be something on the other side worth seeing. Then he folded it and put it under the counter. I'll give it back to him, he said, sometime. He might not want it, I said. Hector smiled at the counter. He might want it exactly. I took the south road out of Burrell's Crossing. The north road was still there, going wherever it went. The fork still split the same way it always had. The December light lay across the grass and the frozen ground and the tops of the fence posts, touching everything equally, the way light does when it doesn't care about significance but hits it anyway. My ledger was in my pocket, pen in hand. I didn't write anything. Some things you keep inside the covers, and some things you let stay out in the air, where they belong, where they can be what they are without you shaping them into something else. The wagon moved south, the horse breath steady. The road was long and straight and cold, and